The wind howled like a wild beast outside the small hut. Thick snow slammed against the walls and windows. The sky had turned white, and everything outside was now hidden under a heavy blanket of ice. A blizzard was coming, and it was one of the worst the planet had seen in years. Ben stood near the control panel inside his hut, checking the weather screen. Red warning signs flashed across it. He sighed and rubbed his hands together, feeling the cold even through his thick sweater. He had lived alone on the planet Thaler for almost 1 year. His job was to study the extreme weather patterns for Earth Science Council. Most days were quiet, sometimes too quiet. There were no cities here, no markets, and no other humans. Only ice, mountains, and strange glowing plants that appeared in the night. The alien species who lived on this planet, called the Zerine, stayed far away from the human research zone. They didn't trust humans. Ben had never seen one up close. Now, as the storm grew stronger, Ben locked the doors and activated the thermal shield around his hut. He placed water on the small stove and sat near the heater, flipping through a digital book. Everything was ready for 3 days of isolation. Outside, the temperature was dropping fast. Suddenly, bang, bang. Ben jumped to his feet. Someone or something was pounding on the door. He stared at it, confused. No one was supposed to be out in this weather. Maybe it was falling ice or an animal. Bang! Bang! It was louder now, no mistake. Someone was out there. Ben ran to the door and opened a small screen to look outside. At first, he saw only snow. But then, through the thick white, he spotted a figure, a tall shape stumbling toward the door, nearly collapsing. Ben didn't think. He quickly unlocked the door and pulled it open. A rush of freezing wind blasted inside. Snow flew everywhere. And then the figure fell forward into his arms. She was not human. Her skin was light blue, and her eyes glowed with a soft silver color. Thin ridges ran from her forehead over the top of her head. Her clothes were torn and frozen, her hands shaking. She looked like she had been walking for hours in the storm. Ben pulled her in and slammed the door shut. He wrapped a thermal blanket around her and brought her near the heater. She didn't resist. Her body was weak, and her lips were almost blue from the cold. Ben made her sit on the floor, gently placing a warm pack on her hands. "It's okay," he said in a calm voice. "You're safe now." She didn't answer. Her eyes slowly closed. She was falling unconscious. Ben worked quickly. He checked her pulse, gave her a heated drink with a straw, and turned up the hut's temperature. After about 20 minutes, the alien woman opened her eyes again. She looked around confused, breathing fast. Then her eyes locked on Ben. She froze. Ben saw her entire body tense up. She tried to stand but fell back down. Her eyes filled with fear. No, Ben said softly, raising his hands to show peace. "I won't hurt you. You were in trouble. I brought you inside." She didn't understand his words, but she understood. His face. She shook her head quickly, crawling backward until her back hit the wall. Ben didn't move closer. He stayed on the other side of the room and sat down. "You're okay now," he said gently. The woman pointed at him, her eyes wide. She spoke something in her language, sharp, scared words that Ben didn't understand. She thought he was dangerous. Ben now understood the problem. Her people, the Zyrene, feared humans. Maybe they had been told stories that humans were monsters or invaders. Now here she was alone in a human's home, weak and afraid. Ben lowered his head and spoke softly. "I'm just one man," he said. "Not a soldier, not a threat. Just a guy with tea and a warm blanket." The woman didn't answer, but she didn't move anymore. She just watched him. Her body still shook, though Ben couldn't tell if it was from the cold or from fear. Ben got up slowly and walked to the stove. He poured warm broth into a small cup and placed it on the floor, halfway between them. Then he returned to his chair. He pointed to the cup. "Food." She didn't touch it. But after 5 long minutes, she crawled slowly toward it, never taking her eyes off Ben. She picked it up with both hands and sipped. A few seconds later, she took another sip. Ben smiled. Outside, the blizzard roared louder than before, but inside the small hut, there was warmth, silence, and a strange beginning of something neither of them could explain. A human and an alien, too. Strangers, not both alone, both afraid, but something had brought them together, and neither of them knew that this moment would change their lives and maybe their entire worlds forever. The hut was quiet except for the soft hum of the heater and the wind outside. Snow still beat against the walls, but the thick metal kept the cold away. Inside, Ben sat on the floor across from the alien woman, who was now wrapped in 2 thick blankets. Her body had stopped shaking, but her eyes never left his face. She held the cup of warm broth in her hands, sipping slowly, carefully. Her glowing eyes were full of fear and confusion. She looked like she wanted to speak but didn't know how. Ben felt the same. He didn't know her name. He didn't know why she was out there in the storm. But he knew she was in danger, and now she was in his home. Ben reached toward his datapad and began drawing. He wasn't good at it, but he tried his best. First, he drew a simple figure of himself. Then next to it, he drew the alien woman. Between them, he drew a line with a small heart in the middle. He turned the pad toward her dot. She looked at it for a moment. Her expression changed slightly. The fear in her eyes faded just a little. She blinked, then looked up at Ben. He smiled again and pointed to himself. Ben, she tilted her head. He pointed again. Ben, that's me. After a few seconds, she opened her mouth. Her voice was soft and broken, like she hadn't spoken in days. Rhea, she said. Ben's eyes lit up. Rhea, that's your name? She nodded once. He smiled wider. Nice to meet you, Rhea. She didn't smile back, but her shoulders relaxed a little. Her hands were still tight around the cup, but her breathing was slower now. Ben stood up slowly, not wanting to scare her. I'm going to get more food, he said gently, pointing to the small kitchen space. You can rest. You're safe. Here. He moved to the other side of the room, pulled out a protein bar and another drink, and placed them on a tray. When he turned back around, Rhea was looking at the drawing again. She seemed to be thinking hard. Ben returned, placed the tray near her, then sat a good distance away. Rhea picked up the protein bar and smelled it. She took a small bite, then chewed slowly. Ben watched her quietly, giving her space dot after she finished eating. She pointed at the drawing pad. Ben handed it to her. She took the pen and began to draw. Her hand moved quickly. She drew a mountain, then snow, then small flying machines, drones, maybe. Then she drew herself running, followed by the storm. She added a red X near the bottom of the drawing. Ben watched closely. It wasn't hard to understand. You were running from something, he said softly. Before the storm hit, she nodded. Drones? Soldiers? Rhea looked at him, then pointed to the flying shape she had drawn. She drew a small symbol next to one of them. It looked like a triangle with a circle inside it. She pointed to it, and then pointed to herself. You're one of them, Ben guessed. But now they're chasing you? She looked away. Her face showed pain and guilt. She gave a small nod. Ben leaned back. This was serious. She wasn't just lost, she was a fugitive. Maybe she had done something wrong in her people's eyes. Or maybe she had done something right. He didn't know yet. He didn't want to scare her with questions, but he had to be careful. If the Zyrene were looking for her, they might come here, and if they didn't trust humans, that could bring trouble. But as he looked at Rhea, he didn't see a threat. He saw someone tired, scared, and alone. He stood and opened a storage box near the bed. He pulled out clean thermal clothes and placed them on the chair next to her. For you, he said, pointing to them. Warm, dry. She looked at them, then at him. Slowly, she reached out and touched the soft cloth. Ben turned around to give her privacy. "I'll check the storm levels," he said, walking to the screen. He checked the data. The blizzard was still strong and would likely last 2 more days. No one would be able to travel until then. Good. That gave them time. He returned to the room and saw that Rhea had changed into the thermal clothes. Her skin looked better now, not as pale. Her breathing was steady. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, watching him. Ben walked over and sat on the floor again. "You don't have to be afraid," he said, even though she didn't understand the words. "I'm not your enemy." Rhea picked up the drawing pad again and added one more picture. This time, she drew Ben's hut. Inside it, she drew herself and Ben sitting. She drew no weapons, no fighting. Then she looked at him and gave the smallest nod. Ben nodded back, outside. The storm kept screaming. But inside the hut, something quiet had begun. A small understanding. A spark of trust. And though they didn't speak the same language, something told Ben that Rhea was not just a lost traveler, she was someone important. And whatever she was running from was coming fast. The next morning, the wind was still wild, but inside the hut, there was calm. Rhea was sleeping on the bed, her breathing slow and steady. Ben sat at the table, writing in his research log, but his eyes often moved toward her. She had changed. Everything. For 1 year, he had lived alone on this cold planet, watching storms and ice. But now, this strange visitor had entered his world, and nothing felt the same. Ben looked at Rhea and thought about the fear in her eyes when she first saw him. She had truly believed he would hurt her. Why? What had she been told about humans? He turned to the corner of the room where Rhea's torn clothes were drying. They were different from anything human-made. Light armor, soft fabric, and small signs or letters stitched into the material Zyrene language, no doubt. Her kind must be advanced, even if they lived far from human colonies. A sound made him turn. Rhea was awake, sitting up slowly. Her silver eyes moved across the room until they found Ben. For a moment, both stayed quiet. Then she gave a small nod. Ben smiled. "Good morning," he said. She didn't reply, but he could tell her fear had lowered. A little trust was there now. Ben went to the heater and poured warm water into 2 cups. He added a fruit powder, stirred, and handed 1 cup to Rhea. She took it carefully, sniffed it, then took a sip. She made a small sound, surprise, maybe even approval. Ben laughed softly. "Yeah, not bad, right?" She didn't understand the words, but she gave a very small smile. The first one. He sat down and pulled out the drawing pad again. He drew another picture. This time, he made a symbol of Earth, then drew himself with a science pack and tools. He added the weather station and the snow sensors. He showed it to Rhea and pointed to the drawing. "I study the weather. I'm not a soldier, just a researcher." Rhea looked at the drawing, then looked at him. Her face was serious. She took the pen and began drawing her own picture again. This time, she drew 3 humans, strong, angry, with weapons in hand. One of them was standing over a Zyrene. The other 2 were burning something. A small fire near a tree. Ben stared at the pie image. Rhea pointed at the humans in the picture, then at him. She raised her eyebrows, asking with her eyes, "Are you like them?" Ben shook his head quickly. "No, never." He took the pad and drew a big red X over the picture of the bad humans. Then he drew himself again, holding books and science gear. Rhea looked at the drawing for a long time. Then she sighed and leaned, her head back against the wall. Ben knew what was happening now. The Zyrene had seen the worst of humanity, or maybe only stories about it. To her, humans were destroyers. And now here she was in a human hut, with a human face staring back at her. He felt sad. He didn't blame her for the fear. If the stories were true, then her people had suffered. Maybe there had been war. Or maybe some humans had done terrible things in the past. But he wanted her to know not all humans were like that. He had to prove it little by little. Later that afternoon, worked on one of the broken panels outside the hut. He had to replace a sensor that the storm had damaged. He put on a thermal suit and stepped outside. The cold hit him hard, even with the gear. The snow was thick, and the wind pushed hard against his body. He moved slowly to the edge of the hut. Where the sensor was located behind him, the door opened. Ben turned and saw Rhea standing just inside, wrapped in blankets. She was watching him work. He waved and gave her a thumbs up. She didn't wave back, but she didn't close the door either. She just stood there, watching as he fixed the broken panel, changed the wire, and tested the signal. Then he walked back in, shaking snow from his shoulders. "You didn't have to watch," Ben joked, pulling off his gloves. "But I appreciate the support." Rhea pointed at the tools on the table. Then she made a motion with her hand, like holding something small, tools. Ben asked. She nodded slowly. He picked up a small scanner, gave it to her, and watched. Rhea turned it over in her hands, then pressed the button and pointed it at the broken wire on the desk. The screen lit up. Ben smiled wide. "You do know tech." She nodded again. It was the first time she had shown something personal. A skill. A part of who she was. Later that night, as they both sat by the heater, Ben spoke slowly, even if she didn't understand. "I don't want to hurt anyone," he said. "I just want peace. To understand this world and maybe understand you." Rhea didn't speak, but she was listening. Her eyes were softer now. She pulled the blanket closer and sat a little nearer to the heater. Outside, the storm continued. But inside the hut, the silence was not cold anymore. It was growing warmer. Like the start of something new. The storm had now lasted 2 days, but inside the hut, things were changing. Ben and Rhea no longer sat in silence. They still couldn't speak each other's language, but now they used hands, drawings, and small sounds to talk. Every little success brought a smile or a nod. It was slow, but it was something real. They were building a bridge, one made of patience and trust. That morning, Ben woke up early. He stretched, yawned, and looked over to where Rhea was sleeping. She had made a little bed for herself near the heater with blankets and a pillow. Her breathing was calm. He didn't want to wake her, so he quietly started boiling water and mixing dried fruit into a bowl. When the smell filled the room, Rhea's eyes opened. She sat up and rubbed her eyes. "Morning," Ben said softly. Rhea stood slowly and walked to the table. She looked at the bowl and then at Ben. He pointed at it. "Food," she repeated. "Food." Ben smiled wide. "Yes, that's right." Rhea gave a small smile too. She picked up the spoon and began to eat. After breakfast, Ben opened the drawing pad again. This time, he pointed to himself and said slowly, "Human." Then he pointed to Rhea and raised his eyebrows. She understood. She tapped her chest and sighed, "Z-Irene." Ben wrote both words on the pad. "Human," he said again, tapping his name. "Zirine," she repeated, tapping her own. They were no longer strangers. They had names, they had labels. They were learning. Later, Ben pulled out a small speaker from a storage box. He pressed a button, and soft music began to play. A slow, calm melody filled the room. It was an old Earth song, no words, just music. Rhea looked surprised. Her eyes sparkled in the dim light. She tilted her head, listening carefully. Then she pointed at the speaker. "What?" Ben smiled. "Music." She repeated the word slowly. "Moo." "Sick." He handed her the speaker. She held it gently, as if it was something alive. After a few minutes, she walked to the drawing pad and began to sketch. She drew a large tree with wide branches and glowing lights. Under it, 2 figures stood, one human, one Zirine. Above them, music notes floated in the air. Ben stared at the drawing. It was beautiful. He gave her a small nod. "You're an artist?" She didn't understand, but she saw his expression and smiled. A real smile, this time full and bright. Later in the afternoon, Rhea pointed at the door. Then she pointed at herself and drew a circle in the air. She wanted to go outside. Ben frowned. "Too dangerous," he said, but Rhea shook her head and pointed to the storm monitor. The screen showed a small break in the blizzard. Just a few hours of calm. Ben thought for a moment. He didn't want to risk her safety, but she looked serious, like she needed this. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, but only for a little while." They both put on warm suits and stepped outside. The wind was quiet, and the snow had stopped for the moment. The sky was still gray, but it wasn't falling anymore. Rhea walked slowly into the open space and looked up. Her eyes closed. She took a deep breath of the cold air and whispered something in her language. Ben couldn't understand, but it sounded like a prayer or a memory. She then bent down and touched the snow. Her fingers moved gently over the surface, as if she was remembering something old. Ben stayed back and watched. After a few minutes, Rhea stood and pointed toward the mountains in the distance. She drew a line in the air from the mountains to the hut. Then she held up 2 fingers and pointed to herself. Ben understood. "You came from there 2 days ago?" She nodded. He pointed to the same mountains and raised his eyebrows. Rhea's face changed. She looked worried. Then she made a new gesture, 2 hands coming together, then breaking apart. She pointed to the mountains again and then to the sky. Ben didn't fully understand, but he could tell she was trying to explain something about the place she came from, something that had gone wrong. They went back inside before the weather changed again. Ben made tea, and Rhea sat with the drawing pad. She drew more pictures. This time she drew ships, big ones. Then she drew her people. Some of them were standing tall. Others were being pulled away in chains. She then drew a symbol, 3 sharp lines with a circle above them. She crossed it out with a red X. Ben's face grew serious. He pointed to the symbol. "Bad?" She nodded firmly. "Bad." He pointed to the people in chains. Then to her. She closed her eyes and nodded again. That was it. She had escaped from something terrible. Maybe from her own people. Maybe from a war. Maybe she had seen humans used for something wrong or told lies about them. Now it made sense. Her fear, her running, the drones she drew. She was not just a traveler. She was someone on the run from a powerful enemy. And she had risked her life to get away. Ben placed his hand over the drawing gently. "You're safe here," he said. Rhea looked at him. And this time she reached out her hand slowly, carefully touching his hand back. There were still questions, still fear, still danger ahead. But for this one moment, 2 different beings from 2 different worlds sat in peace. And the first real bond between human and Zerine had begun, with snow outside and warmth between them. The next morning, the snow had stopped. The sky was still gray, but the storm had moved on. Thick white snow covered everything outside the hut like a heavy blanket. It was silent, calm, and cold. Ben stood near the window, holding a hot drink in his hand. Rhea stood beside him, her silver eyes scanning the empty white land. She looked nervous. He could feel something was wrong. She had been quiet all morning. No drawings, no small smiles. Only silence. Ben turned to her. "Something's coming, isn't it?" Rhea didn't answer, but her eyes met his, and they were full of fear. Suddenly, the radar screen on the wall beeped. Ben rushed over. A red light blinked on the map. One object. "Moving fast, airborne, drone," he whispered. "It found us." Rhea stepped forward and looked at the screen. She recognized the symbol right away, a Zerine scout drone. Her body became stiff. She grabbed the drawing pad and quickly sketched a circle around the drone, then drew 3 more behind it. She pointed. "More are coming." Ben's face tightened. "They're tracking you." Rhea nodded. Ben thought fast. If a drone found the hut, It meant soldiers might be close. If they came and found her here, they might attack or worse, capture her. And if they thought Ben was helping her, he would be in danger too. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small emergency bag. It had thermal packs, food, water, and a flare gun. "We need to leave," he said. Rhea looked confused. Ben pointed to the window, then to the drone symbol. He made a walking motion with his fingers and pointed to the south. Then he showed a small red dot on the screen, the human outpost, 80 kilometers away. "Safe place," he said. "We go together." Rhea understood. She nodded, serious. They both moved quickly. Ben packed food, charged a small power device, and grabbed 2 thick cloaks. Rhea helped. She moved with speed and skill, checking wind levels and looking through the snow map with sharp eyes. She was clearly trained in survival. Before leaving, Ben placed a small heat device inside the hut. It would confuse the drone sensors and make it look like someone was still inside. Then they stepped out into the deep snow and began to walk. The wind was light, but the snow was thick. Each step was slow. Their boots sank and the cold bit through their clothes. Still, they pushed forward, one step at a time. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their eyes and hands gave all the signals they needed. Hours passed. The mountains behind them grew smaller, but the sound of a soft hum stopped them in their tracks. Ben looked up. A small black shape flew through the sky. It was fast and silent, a Zyrene drone. It passed above them, scanning the ground. Rhea grabbed Ben and pulled him into a low trench made by frozen wind. They dropped into the snow, holding their breath. The drone hovered, its red lights flashing. Then it turned and flew away. Ben and Rhea waited another minute, then stood again. Rhea tapped her wrist and pointed to the sky. "More will come. Soon." Ben looked ahead. They had to reach the lower hills before dark. The terrain would help hide them. They kept walking, faster now, but just as the sun began to set, Rhea stopped. Her hand shot out, stopping Ben from taking another step. She crouched low and pointed to the ground. Ahead, footprints, fresh ones. Ben bent down and saw them too. Heavy boots. More than one person. The prints were deep and wide. Soldiers. Then they heard it. A soft, steady sound in the snow. Not wind. Footsteps. Ben and Rhea ran. They dashed behind a hill and crawled under a thick snow cover. They stayed low, breathing quietly. Voices echoed nearby. Harsh words in Zyrene language. Metal boots crunching snow. Rey held her breath and closed her eyes. Ben placed his hand on hers. She opened her eyes and looked at him. He nodded once. "Stay strong." The voices passed. Slowly. Then they faded. Minutes later, Rhea peeked over the hill. Clear. They moved again. This time, even more carefully. By the time darkness fell, they found a small cave under an ice ridge. Ben used a heat stone to warm the space. Rhea placed a small motion alarm near the entrance. Inside, they sat close together, eating a small meal. Their hands were cold, but their minds were alert. Ben looked at Rhea. "Why are they chasing you?" he asked softly, even though he knew she didn't fully understand. Rhea looked down. Then she reached for the drawing pad. She drew a Zyrene figure standing in front of others, speaking. Behind her, other Zyrene wore armor and had red eyes. One pointed a weapon at her. Then she drew herself running. Ben understood. "You spoke out." "Against them." She nodded. Ben added to the picture, a small human and Zyrene shaking hands. He pointed to the future. Rhea looked at it for a long moment. Then she added a heart between them. Ben smiled. For now, they were still in danger. The cold was harsh. The path was hard, but trust had grown between them, and somewhere far ahead was safety. The night was cold and quiet. Inside the small ice cave, Ben and Rhea sat close together, sharing the warmth of the heat stone. The wind outside howled through the snowy hills, but they were safe for now. Rhea checked the small sensor she had placed at the cave's entrance. It blinked green. No movement nearby. Ben looked at her and smiled. "You're smart. That thing really works." She didn't understand all his words, but she could feel the meaning in his voice and eyes. She smiled back and gave a small nod. They had walked far that day. Their bodies were tired, but their minds were focused. The drone had seen them. Soldiers had been close. They couldn't stop for long. The human outpost was still far, maybe 2 more days on foot. Ben leaned his head against the wall of the cave and looked at the drawing pad again. He had brought it with them. On the last page, Rhea had drawn the 2 of them standing in front of a large building, the outpost. Behind it was the sun, and between them was peace. Ben touched the drawing and whispered, "We'll get there, I promise." Rhea looked at the picture too. Her eyes were calm but sharp. She was not weak. She had survived the storm, escaped her enemies, and now walked beside someone who once scared her. In just a few days, they had become something close to friends. The next morning, the snow had settled again. The sun peeked through the clouds, casting pale light over the frozen land. Ben and Rhea left the cave and began walking south. The wind was softer. The cold still bit at their faces, but it was better than before. They took turns leading. Rhea had sharp eyes. She spotted paths between frozen rocks. Ben had the map stored in his tablet, so he guided their direction. Together they moved like a team. At one point, Rhea pointed to the sky. A silver line crossed the clouds. "Ship," Ben said. "One of yours?" Rhea shook her head. Then she drew a larger triangle with long wings. She tapped her drawing and crossed it out. "Enemy ship?" Ben guessed. Rhea nodded. They moved faster. As the day passed, they reached a wide frozen lake. The ice was thick, but cracks ran across it like sharp lines. Ben looked worried. "We have to cross," he said. "There's no way around." Rhea tested the ice with her foot. It didn't break, but it groaned under her weight. She looked at Ben and held out her hand. They stepped together, slowly, step by step. Halfway across, a sharp crack echoed under their feet. The ice shifted. Rhea froze. Ben stopped too, holding her hand tight. "Don't move fast," he whispered. The ice groaned again. Suddenly, Rhea's foot slipped into a small hole, and the ice broke around her leg. She gasped and fell forward. Ben dropped to his knees and grabbed her arm. "Hold on." She held tightly, teeth clenched from the cold. The freezing water reached her knee. Ben pulled with all his strength. The ice around her leg cracked more, but finally, she was out. They both fell back onto the ice, breathing hard. Rhea shivered, her face pale. Ben quickly opened his bag, pulled out a thermal wrap, and wrapped it around her leg. Then he took off his own jacket and put it over her shoulders. "You'll freeze," she whispered in her language, but Ben didn't understand. He just smiled. "We're almost there." They kept walking after a short rest, Ben keeping her close. As night came, they reached a line of old wind towers. These towers used to send weather signals to nearby stations, but now they were silent and broken. Ben pointed ahead. "Outpost is just past this field." Rhea's eyes lit up. They found a small shelter at the base of one of the towers. Inside was an old bench and a faded map on the wall. Ben lit a small lamp and made a hot drink. Rhea sat with her back against the wall, rubbing her cold hands. "You saved me," she said softly in her language. She looked at him with warmth. Ben smiled, though he didn't understand the words. He could feel the emotion behind them. Then they heard a sound. Buzz. B-U-Z-Z. Buzz. Ben jumped up and checked the sensor. A red light flashed. Movement nearby. He looked at Rhea. She nodded, already standing ready. Ben peeked outside. 3 shapes moved through the snow. Zyrene soldiers. Their armor shone under the moonlight. One of them carried a scanner. "They followed us," Ben whispered. Rhea pointed to the edge of the tower where an old ladder went up to the top. She motioned, "Go hide, wait." Ben followed her up the ladder. At the top, they crouched behind a broken wall. The soldiers walked past below. One of them stopped and looked at the shelter. Another pointed at the ground. Footprints. They began to search. Ben's heart beat fast. He looked at Rhea. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small disc. She held it tightly. "What's that?" he whispered. She gave him a sharp look and made a signal. "Wait." Then she threw the disc far away into the snow. Boom. A loud sound exploded in the distance. A bright flash lit up the sky. The soldiers turned and ran toward the noise. Ben stared at Rhea. She smiled. A trap. They waited for 10 more minutes, then climbed down and ran through the trees. Ahead, far in the distance, they saw a small light blinking. The outpost. They had made it. The blinking light ahead grew brighter as Ben and Rhea moved closer. Snow still covered the land, but the human outpost was near finally. Their bodies were weak from cold and hunger, but they didn't stop. They kept walking, step by step, towards safety. The outpost stood like a square metal block in the snow. Tall lights surrounded it, and solar panels stretched along the roof. A human flag waved slowly in the cold wind. Ben raised his arm and fired the flare gun. A red light shot into the sky. A few moments later, the front gate opened with a loud creak. 2 human guards stepped out, weapons ready. They lowered them when they saw Ben. One of them shouted, "Is that you, Ben?" "What happened?" Ben smiled weakly and pointed at Rhea. "Help us. She's not a threat. She needs safety." The guards stared at Rhea. Her blue skin, glowing eyes, and alien clothing made them pause. One guard reached for his communicator. "She's Zerine," the other whispered. "Should we call command?" Ben stepped in front of Rhea. "She helped me. She's not the enemy. Please." The guards looked at each other, then nodded. "Come inside, but stay close." They entered the warm hall of the outpost. Bright lights, heaters, and food machines filled the space. Ben had never been so happy to feel normal warmth. Rhea looked around, confused and alert. Everything was new to her, human tech, voices, and machines. But she stayed calm beside Ben. A doctor came and checked them both. Ben had frostbite on his hands, but it wasn't serious. Rhea's leg had bruises from the icefall, but the doctor treated her gently. "You're lucky to be alive," the doctor said to Ben. "That storm was the worst in 5 years." Ben nodded. "I wasn't alone." He looked at Rhea. That night after eating and resting, Ben met with the outpost commander, a serious woman named Major Lena. She sat at a table with 2 officers beside her. Rhea stood behind Ben, quiet but alert. "Ben," the major said, "you brought a Zerine into a human outpost. Do you understand how dangerous that is?" "She's not our enemy," Ben said calmly. "She's running from her own people. She told me they're doing something wrong, something evil." Rhea stepped forward. She placed the drawing pad on the table and opened it to the pictures she had made during the journey. One by one, she pointed. Soldiers, chains, burning homes, and her escape. The officers leaned in, studying the pictures. "She was punished for speaking the truth," Ben said. "She risked her life to escape. She needs help." The major looked at Rhea. "Can she speak our language?" "Not yet, but she understands." Rhea pointed to the last picture, 2 hands shaking, one human, one Zerine. "Peace." There was silence in the room. Then Major Lena nodded slowly. "We'll send a message to Central Command. Maybe they'll listen." The next morning, Rhea was given a clean room, warm clothes, and food. Ben stayed close, translating as much as he could. Together, they waited. 2 days later, a reply came from Earth. A meeting had been arranged. Human leaders and Zerine leaders would speak. Rhea had been invited as a witness, someone who had seen the truth with her own eyes. Ben was shocked. "They listened?" The major nodded. Your story and her courage may change everything. The meeting took place through a holocall. Leaders from both species appeared on large screens in the outpost's main hall. Rhea stood before them, strong and calm. Ben stood beside her. She used hand signs, pictures, and simple words they had practiced together. She showed the drawings she had made. She told them about the soldiers who hurt her people, the lies they told about humans, and the kindness she found in one small hut during the storm. At first, some Zerine leaders were angry. They didn't believe her. They said humans were dangerous, but Rhea did not step back. She placed a hand on her heart and pointed to Ben. "He saved me," she said in her own language. "When I was cold, when I was hunted, he protected me. He is not my enemy. He is my friend." The room was silent. Then a human ambassador spoke. "Let us open the door. Let us learn from each other." And finally, one Zerine elder stood. "We were wrong about all humans. Maybe we need to listen more." That day, a new path began. Not war, not fear, but peace. A few days later, Ben sat outside the outpost under a soft sky. The snow had started to melt. Rhea joined him, holding 2 cups of warm fruit drink. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sky. Ben turned to her. "What happens now?" Rhea smiled. "We build," he laughed softly. "Together?" She nodded. "Together. From fear to friendship, from snow to sun." That their journey had changed more than just their lives, that had started something greater, a message to the stars. Peace is possible, even between worlds.